Yes, you read the title correctly, and no, I'm not rage baiting. This time, I will be dying on this hill until further notice because the discussion around this unit is horrible, and I feel like people are giving Escoffier too much praise in comparison to what she actually does. No, I'm not saying she's a bad unit, far from it. It's just that there have been people saying she needs a nerf, she's broken, or saying she's best in slot for certain units when she really isn't. Hello there, Flip here, and today we're going to be talking about Escoffier. Usually I would make like my comparison video for she's better than X in X scenario like I did with Lolly and Neonson, but currently I feel like that's been relatively well documented in the community, as her poster teams are already pretty apparent. So unless I get a lot of comments saying they want to see my team analysis, then I probably am not going to make one for Escoffier. In this video, I am going to be diving into why I feel like Escoffier is being too highly praised in the community for a character that, looking at the meta as a whole, is relatively tame and balanced, if anything. But before we do that, as always, if at any point during the video you're entertained or informed, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing, as I talk on various topics regarding Genshin's meta and I'll try to keep you updated. Channel members, wow, I now need 2 pages to fit all of you in. Thank you so much for the continued support, and with that, let's begin. So I guess the first thing to do is briefly go over Escoffier's kit and then explain why people think she needs to be nerfed in the first place. If you want a more in-depth explanation as standard, go to my dedicated Escoffier video. Otherwise, I'll just sum up the key things here. Escoffier is a 5-star cryo unit, blah blah blah, and she kind of just does everything. Her skill has fast cryo application as well as doing extremely high amounts of single target damage for an off-field unit, rivaling other dedicated off-field DPS in optimal scenarios. Then for her elemental burst, it's an AoE nuke, as well as healing the entire team, because why not? And all that would sound really good already, but what takes it to the next level is the fact that she also just has Chevreuse mechanics built into her kit, because depending on the amount of Hydra or Cryo party members in your team, you get a res shred that starts really weak, but with a full freeze team, this shoots up to being a 55% Cryo and Hydra res shred. And her other passive also gives her extra single target healing after using her burst. So yes, despite the fact that she's going to be a free support, her kit is very overloaded. I'm sorry, I'm gonna quit content. This is also majorly why people are calling for Escoffier nerfs, as her kit just practically has everything an off-field unit / support would need, and that sets a bad precedent for future units if they're willing to give Escoffier this much stuff, and also they nerfed Aoife for no real reason. But I'm here to say that I think it's fair for Escoffier to have all of this. In fact, if she were missing even one aspect, whether it was the healing, the damage, or the res shred, she would just be a not very good unit, and let me explain why. Escoffier is a unit designed for Cryo and Hydra DPS units, and by extension freeze teams. That is where her value lies. I know she can be used outside of freeze teams as a cryo flex slot for hypercarries like Wanderer, or in reverse melt teams and double cryo forward melt teams, but in regards to what her best teams actually are, and where most people are going to be using her, it is going to be free stuff. And I've seen a lot of people comparing Escoffier directly with a character like Chevreuse, as their kits are extremely similar, going over how Escoffier has a stronger shred, more healing, and does a lot more damage than Chevreuse, to explain how Escoffier is overtuned. But I feel like that comparison misses quite a few details. For one, in terms of pure damage amping, even if you want to include Furina's buffing, although Escoffier's res shred is stronger, Chevreuse has the shred on top of her 40% attack buff, as well as her damage bonus at C6. So even by herself, her buffs are more relevant to her teams, which doesn't even factor in the fact that you can use stronger buffers with Chevreuse, like Bennett and Neonson, compared to the Cryo and Hydra roster, which pretty much just gets Shenhe past Furina. Then for the healing aspect, Chevreuse heals enough to sustain teams even if it's less than Escoffier. Escoffier's healing is mostly important because of the Furina synergy, not really for survivability, which Chevreuse doesn't really work with Furina in the first place, so this doesn't matter. And in regards to damage, yes, Escoffier does a lot of damage, especially on teams with Shenhe, that help lower energy requirements so she doesn't need to use Favonius and buffs her more, but freeze is a reaction that doesn't do damage or amplify damage in any way, so her having high personal damage makes sense to me if it's to compensate for the fact that freeze is a reaction that doesn't really do anything nowadays. Going back to the Chevreuse comparison, slower pyro applicators like Toma or Pyro MC can just build tons of elemental mastery, and you're adding sometimes close to 200k AoE damage to your rotations for free, which is not something freeze teams can do. And my last main point as to why I think Escoffier's kit should be this strong is because look at the character she's supporting. Relics like the Kamisata twins and Ganyu now have teams that are going to be able to clear a lot more comfortably. Even fucking Aito has a more staple team option to where he can actually be recommended over other cryo units. And even after Escoffier, it's not like Wriothesley, Ayaka, Ganyu, and anyone else Escoffier buffs are now really competing with any of the modern carries or some of the top tier DPS. They are just more in line, which is what the elements needed. If Escoffier was able to make these characters now rival Neuvillette, we can have that discussion about if she's too strong. Although as it stands now, she kinda just made these characters average by today's standards, if anything. And if you want to compare that to Chevroux's teams, which the only reason I am comparing them is because they're so similar, Chevroux's just enables stronger units and stronger teams. So I don't see how Escoffier is a character that needs nerfs if you have a unit like Chevroux's who's as good, if not just a better character than Escoffier. I would even argue that other 5.0 characters like Sitlolly and Yonton have pushed the meta more forward than Escoffier has. And people were calling Sitlolly underpowered in pre-release. Now with my points for Escoffier needing to be this strong covered, there are two units I want to talk about in particular, being Ayaka and Neuvillette, as I feel like it's being overrated what Escoffier brings to Neuvillette teams, and people are looking at the 100k DPS Ayaka calculations and are taking them way too seriously. Starting with Ayaka, I don't want to deny the notion that Escoffier should just be a playability upgrade to Ayaka, which I'm not sure I made clear in my last video. One of the problems I had with Ayaka is that so much of her damage is on her burst, and if you miss it, which can be very likely, that's almost all of your damage gone. Though on Escoffier team, since the damage is split, there's less of a burden on Ayaka, which makes it easier for the people who whiff Ayaka's burst to pick her up. But the point I was trying to make is that if you already have no problems playing Ayaka's hypercarry teams and are able to consistently hit her burst anyways, I don't think Escoffier is really going to be doing that much for you. Ayaka's main problem has never been damage, it's always been how good you are landing her burst. And since Ayaka's burst is so front loaded, it makes it so that waves essentially end if you can hit it. So if you're already an Ayaka player that has no issues with landing her burst, and are clearing on like 1 or 2 bursts regardless, is Escoffier really going to be helping that much? For example, when Furina released, people were experimenting with Ayaka Furina stuff because it was better on paper for Ayaka, due to Furina's sustained damage, and more consistent buffing. But in practice, a lot of Ayaka mains still preferred Shenhe setups anyways because they could clear waves faster with front-loaded damage if they positioned Ayaka's burst well. And Escoffier reminds me of this, and to me there's only 2 ways of looking at it. The first being that you're bad at playing Ayaka, me, and with her burst a lot in which Ayaka doesn't reach nearly the damage that she does in her sheets. That makes her feel like a 100k DPS character. Or you are actually good at playing Ayaka, in which yes, Escoffier should still be an upgrade, in which I've seen people run Ayaka, Shenhe, Furina, Shilunin teams, but with Ayaka's front-loaded nature, I'm not sure if the performance increase is going to be as big as it looks. So despite the fact that yes, Escoffier is good for Ayaka, I'm not trying to deny that, people acting like this somehow makes Ayaka a tier 0 DPS, I don't know, it just doesn't seem right to me. I guess we'll have to wait to actually see this in live. I could be wrong, but I have a lot of doubts about it. What I don't have any doubts about though is Neuvillette, because this one I just don't understand at all. Why are so many people spreading that full freeze Neuvillette is his best team? Can we please think critically about this for more than a second? The team in question is Neuvillette, Furina, Escoffier, and Sitlolly, in which at least in single target is the best performing Neuvillette team over his hypercarry teams, but that is where the upsides really end. The main selling point of the team is that it's supposed to enable slightly shorter rotations for Neuvillette, but at least from the gameplay shown by leakers, which to be fair could be skill issue, it doesn't seem like anything corroborates that. It still ends up being a 28 to 30 second rotation, as you have to reswap in Escoffier for 100% uptime on her turret, and you also most likely want to reswap in Sitlolly due to how inconsistent scroll can be on this team to refresh it. So the shorter rotation thing doesn't really seem to exist, and then from there's just downsides. For starters, the team scales badly with Neuvillette's investment, as if you look at the damage distribution for the team, Neuvillette is doing around 50% or less of the team's damage, whereas in his hypercarry teams he does closer to 70% of the team's damage. And the reason why this is important is that it means that if you do get better investment on her Neuvillette, whether that's with higher quality artifacts, getting his signature weapon, or his constellations, they'll be more impactful on Neuvillette's hypercarry teams than his Escoffier teams. On top of this, if you look at Neuvillette's Ascension 1 scaling for his Draconic stacks, it's a bigger increase going from 2 to 3 Draconic stacks than going from 1 to 2 Draconic stacks, so Neuvillette C1 is just worse when you're playing a full freeze Escoffier team. And I went to calculate to make sure I wasn't just feels crafting, and yeah, Neuvillette C1 with his weapon is able to overcome the gap in damage that Escoffier has, where the Escoffier team doesn't really have a good vertical investment path for Neuvillette, as both Escoffier's weapon and early constellations don't really do anything for him. And it's not just with vertical investment, even at C0 I wouldn't really use this team. I've already mentioned the scroll set inconsistencies, but on top of that, Escoffier is majorly a single target character, and you're using her without a grouper, and when you're sacrificing 20% of Neuvillette's damage to run Escoffier who's mostly single target, then you're losing a lot of your team's AoE performance for no real reason, as Neuvillette isn't a character that struggles with single target content in the first place. Dropping Beidou for Yu'lon and Sucre's Taser teams makes sense, as Taser does fine in AoE checks and struggles in single target, which Yu'lon can help with. Same case in running more single target oriented characters than Nilu teams, as again she struggles in single target, but Neuvillette's numbers, even if you want to say he's been power crept, still outperforms and is competitive with characters that have much worse AoE than him. So what is the need to improve his single target numbers at the cost of his AoE damage and performance when he simply just doesn't need it? So no, in reality reality, this is a Neuvillette side greed at best, and should not be treated as his best team or an actual vertical investment path. So no, as it stands now, Escoffier just isn't broken or as strong as some people have been making her out to be, despite the fact that she is still a good character. She doesn't make any of the older characters now rival or better than the modern carries we have, and the Escoffier Neuvillette agenda just needs to end. She isn't really a problem for the meta. If anything, she's a positive and a well-balanced character given the roster that she's designed to support. It's a good thing that Escoffier is this strong, as she can now carry the slack for the older characters. What about this qualifies a nerf? But with that, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on Escoffier, as I would love to hear it and I respond to almost every single comment. Channel members, thank you so much for the support. It means the world to me and I love you all. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.